And I'm recording this for my dad because my dad's super into politics and he really wants to see it. So that's why I'm recording it. Okay, so I decided to do my presentation on California's welfare system because welfare has kind of been something that I'm really passionate about, and like the transformation of what I want to see come out of welfare. And so that's something I find really interesting. Something that a lot of us see and hear about is how welfare is taken advantage of. And so one of my favorite videos that I have of welfare is labeled Welfare Queen, and I wanted to share it with you. I hope no ad pops up. Yep, there's an ad. Okay. It's straight from YouTube, so.
Okay, EBT is basically about electronic benefit transfer, and it's basically about welfare and having children and just for money, just for the state, so the state of California can pay for WIC, GR, food stamps, daycare. I mean, the state of California, if you want EBT, the state of California is the best place to get your money. They'll pay you the most. And yeah, it's like $221 for GR and about $179 for food. That's for each person. So, yeah. You get free daycare, you get free food, you can go to fast food restaurants now. Domino's Pizza is accepting EBT. McDonald's, I haven't saw something from McDonald's. Subway, you can take the EBT card. Like you get $221 in cash. You get free daycare, so if you have 4 kids or 6 kids, you get money for free daycare. So all of them go to daycare. And most people, they have their friend as the daycare person, and they split the money. I heard all about it. And they split the money for that, and then you have the cash that they give you, and then the lights and gas and the free home. I mean, who would want to work in America? This is what the taxpayers are paying for.
So I really like this video because it kind of shows how like any person can take advantage of the system. It's just knowing the system, knowing how to work with it, and knowing how to like play with your options to try and get the most money out of it. And one of my favorite parts of this was this quote where she says, "California is the best place to get your money," which I find really ironic because like we live in California, which is the place where people have actually moved to just to get the most money out of welfare, because California is so open to giving money and services to people who are low income or unemployed. But one of the problems with that is that they don't actually promote people to get back into the workforce. It's just handing out free things. So I read an article that states that California is the welfare capital. And it's actually for a few reasons. So one of the problems that we have with welfare is that like each state is a different size and has different population numbers. So California makes up 12% of the United States population. So California would naturally be a little bit more expensive, like they spend more money on welfare. But the problem is that they also make up 34% of the country's welfare system. So even though they only have 12% of the population, they're paying out 34% of the amount of welfare that the entire country is paying out. So this is like obviously very disproportionate. So there's something that California is doing that is just, we're pouring out way more money than the other states are doing. So it pays out the most amount of money, and we actually rate really low in terms of like economic prosperity. So there's a lot of other states out there that are just more economically prosperous than we are, which with California being one of the largest like farming places, like the world's food supply, a lot of it comes from California, yet we're still one of the least economically prosperous states, which kind of seems a little weird for us. And then we also compare really badly with European countries. And that's, for me, that was a little shocking, just knowing that like Europe, America is so proud and like wanting to help all the European countries become economically prosperous and have these different governments. But yet, in terms of welfare, California ranks a lot lower. Like the only state or the only country that ranks lower than us in terms of welfare is Denmark. And California is like the next up. So it seemed a little like off for me. So this is a graph of like the economically prosperous states. So California ranks as number 44. Out of 50, California is number 44. We also have New York is ranking 50. Illinois is 40. I got the other ones I had. And then I think it was Pennsylvania is also pretty low. And then when we look here, this is a graph that shows the amount of money that each state puts out in terms of welfare. And as you can see, California is extremely blue. California pays out $49.7 billion worth of welfare each year. And even like compared with New York, like it's a lot. I forgot what New York was, but it's a lot more. And when we look at the graphs together, you can see a little bit of resemblance in like which states are kind of in common in terms of welfare and economic prosperity. New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, they all rank in the top 10, or the bottom 10 on this graph, and the top 10, or the bottom 10 of this graph. Like they pay them, the states that pay the most, and they're also the least economically prosperous. So you can kind of see like if we have those correlations in like so many different areas, it's kind of weird. Like you got to think that there's something that is wrong in this situation that I'm sure we can attribute to welfare. When I was in high school, my dad sent me this article. I have no idea who it's by, so I couldn't cite it, but I loved it. I posted it on Instagram. It was my favorite thing of the year. It just made my day. So I wanted to read it to you guys. Put me in charge of food stamps. I'd get rid of food stamps. No cash for buying ding-dongs or ho-hos, just money for 50-pound bags of rice and beans, blocks of cheese, and all the powdered milk you can haul away. If you want steak and frozen pizza, then get a job. Put me in charge of Medicaid. The first thing I'd do is to get women Norplant birth control implants or tubal ligations. Then we'll test recipients for drugs, alcohol, and nicotine. If you want to reproduce, use drugs, alcohol, or smoke, then get a job. Put me in charge of government housing. Ever live in a military barracks? You will maintain our property in a clean and good state of repair. Your home will be subject to inspections anytime, and possessions will be inventoried. If you want a plasma TV or Xbox 360, then get a job in your own place. In addition, you will either present a check stub from a job each week, or you will report to a government job. It will be cleaning the roadways of trash, painting and repairing public housing, whatever we find for you. We will sell your 22-inch rims and low-profile tires and your blasting stereo speakers and put that money toward the common good. Before you write that I violated someone's rights, realize that all of the above is voluntary. If you want our money, accept our rules. Before you say that this would be demeaning and ruin their self-esteem, consider that it wasn't long ago that taking someone else's money for doing absolutely nothing was demeaning and lowered self-esteem. If we are expected to pay for other people's mistakes, we should at least attempt to make them learn from bad choices. The current system rewards people for continuing to make bad choices, and while you are on government subsistence, you no longer can vote. Yes, that's correct. For you to vote would be a conflict of interest. You will voluntarily remove yourself from voting while you are receiving a government welfare check. If you want to vote, then get a job. Now, yes, this is very drastic, and it has a lot of different changes than we have now. And no, it's probably not going to be accepted in any way, shape, or form into the government system that we have now. But they make some really good points in terms of what welfare gives now and what the actual purpose is. Yes, there's anomalies in the system where we have people who are just on low-income jobs and are trying their best, and they just need money to get through. But at the same time, we also have people taking advantage of the system, and no one's doing anything to stop it. And since California is the welfare capital, we need solutions. Because with our economics the way that they are, we need to find money somewhere. And if welfare is going through the roof in the amount of money that we're spending in proportion to our population, we need to make some changes. And yet there's other states who are spending way less than we are with pretty decent population sizes themselves. So California isn't just an anomaly. We're definitely doing something wrong. So I propose that we go back to the roots and kind of get back to what welfare is for. But before we can actually solve the problem, we have to think of reasons why things wouldn't work. So first of all, we went through a recession. this got rid of some of our jobs, made money scarce, also made outsourcing jobs. So we don't have as many jobs here because companies are now outsourcing because it's cheaper for them to pay for outsourced jobs. And so there's not as many jobs here. We have population size and type. California is obviously, like I said, the largest population out of all the states. So we have to take that into effect in terms of what's a reasonable amount of money to pay out for our population size. And then we also have to think of our population type. Because, at least for California, where I grew up, there was a lot of people who weren't legal and couldn't get the type of jobs that I could get. So how are we supposed to balance that? Where do we draw the line on who's going to get it, who's going to get welfare help, who's not going to, how are we supposed to accept these people? Kind of draw those lines because those are some serious subjects that we have to address. But one of the biggest ones I think is we have to think about motivation. Because right now there's no motivation in California to get off the welfare system and back into the workforce. I found this statistic on the type of amount of money that jobs will pay out. And with a single mom and with 2 children, the amount of money you can make on welfare is about $30,000 a year. Now, that's a pretty decent amount of living. I know that I did not make that much in a year. So you can make a decent job off of that. But then when you look at an entry-level job, you're only getting paid $18,000. There is no motivation to get off of this $30,000 paycheck to an $18,000 paycheck. And you have to start somewhere. You can't just put yourself through school and then get a great job if you have no money because you're on welfare. You have to start at an entry-level position. But entry-level doesn't pay as much as welfare. So why leave welfare? There's no motivation to get there. So some of my solutions, I personally like the drastic measures. But as I said, that's probably not logical. So, as we talked about in class, temporary assistance for needy families. One of the goals of this were to mainly put people back into the workforce because they wanted to promote programs that would get fewer people that were eligible to go into welfare, but then also when you're on welfare to push you back out into the workforce and try and get you to become a participating citizen. But one of the issues with this is that our programs don't promote this anymore. For California's welfare system, we have Cal 10. So there's 10 different programs that we have that are considered under welfare. All 10 of the programs that California currently has are all in the business of giving. None of the programs that assist in none of the systems that we have are built to put people back out to the workforce. They're all, let's give children education, let's give people food stamps, let's give people money for daycare, but there is no, let's give them the resources to put them back in the workforce. There's no resume building. There's nothing to promote people to get back out there. It's all just giving, and then you figure the rest out yourself. And I think that what we really need is to get as many people off of welfare as we can, because not only is this going to help with the amount of money we're paying out, but it's also going to help with our economy and putting people back out into the workforce. We're going to build up all our economic system, and it's going to be great for our economy overall. Just with this change of adding another program that instead of giving people things, it pushes them to do better with their lives. So my proposition is with California, we definitely need a change. With our economics the way that they are, as well as the amount of money that we're paying out in proportion to our population, we're definitely not in a good place right now. So my proposition is that we need to start, instead of giving everything that the taxpayers are putting into the system, instead of just giving it away and letting people use it, we need to put it into programs that are going to help people get off the system. Because that's what TANF was built for, was to get people off the system and to help increase the prosperity of the states in general. And those are my sources. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good job. So, questions?
Yeah.
So how do you balance, what am I trying to ask? Do you think that you should have a sliding scale for people that are entering back into the workforce?
What do you mean, like by
So-
sliding scale?
Like you talked about how an entry-level job you make $18,000 and on
Mhm.
welfare you can make up to $30,000.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they should have partial payments for people that are in the transition of trying to make more than $30,000 but aren't there yet?
Yes, I do agree with that. I think that you can give people like a certain amount of money to help them like build that up, but at the same time, like going from 30,000 to 12,000, like that's already like a huge difference. If you get like per person, that's already gonna cut our amounts in more than half just by like putting each person in an entry level job. And then once you get into the entry level job, you can move forward from there. So I think that like there should be definitely like a black and white line of like where the income is going to be cut off. It's like once you make it to this income, we're not going to support you anymore. And I don't know where that's at just because I'm not totally in tune with economics and where all that's at. But I definitely think there needs to be a black and white line of like, okay, this is where we cut off, and then like have steps. And like each step that you get to, you get paid less and less because it helps people to be like more independent and more careful with their money. And it also gives them something to be proud of, where like they're able to take care of themselves without being like completely dependent on the system.
I understood your question. I retract my question.
Well, I have a couple comments and a question. One, I thought it was interesting that the video you showed, the individual in the video was saying, here's how they get your money. In the poem you read, the author made it very clear that it's our, meaning the people's
Yes.
money. So I thought that was an interesting contrast. Also, in the poem, there was a reference to not allowing folks that receive public assistance to vote. But it made me think of Congress, because there's still an inherent interest. They are able to vote for the benefits, obviously, for themselves. The question I had was about the slides, and I thought it was a compelling graph and a compelling statistic that said that the folks receiving the states where the most folks are on welfare, the least economic prosperous. Can you comment kind of on what you think accounts for that? Because that was a very compelling statistic. Like how are those linked?
Well, I didn't do a whole lot of research into like exactly how they're linked. For me, like just because I got them as two different sources originally, and then like as I was like reading the articles and like looking at the graphs more and more, I saw more and more similarities in the states that were both not economically prosperous and had a lot of payout in terms of welfare. So just like looking at those, it's like even though it might not be the main cause or the only cause of why a state isn't economically prosperous, I definitely think it's a significant factor given all the states that were in both regions.
So that link was something you stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But who's to say it's not the other way? So you're making the argument that they're not economically prosperous because they give away welfare benefits. Well, what if they give away welfare benefits because they're not as economically prosperous?
Well, I think that when we do this, when you look at welfare, we're giving money out to the people who either are low income or they don't work at all. So there is, I'm trying to word this right. You're paying out money for people who aren't doing anything with their lives, basically. So if you're paying out money that's going nowhere, how can that be economically prosperous? Like if that person's doing nothing with their lives, how is that helping? Because they're not helping businesses to grow or to be more prosperous. They're not paying out any more money into the economy, into like the California's businesses and what California businesses are selling. So they're not putting any more money back into that. So it's either stagnant or it's loss.
I had a question kind of similar to Vincent's. You brought up a good point because California, there's a higher cost of living. So, but if you look at the Midwest or like the East, or actually even if you go to Virginia too, like a $30,000 house will buy you a mansion there. Here, it's going to buy you just like a standard house.
Okay.
So, like.
But when you think about it,
people do. I mean, it kind of does make sense of why we would have more welfare because it's more expensive to live here. Rent is more expensive. Housing is more expensive.
Yes.
Childcare, everything.
And then when you look at it in terms of like economically prosperous, the amount that you're being paid in jobs are different too. So it's like if you need to pay more where you live, you also earn more. If you need to pay less, you also like pay less. So like even though like we might be paying more because the living is different, and of course, like in different states, it's going to be different, whether it's on East Coast or West Coast, because of course, New York is also, they're the second highest and like paying the most amount of money, but then it's like, well, they're on the East Coast, shouldn't their cost of living be less than, depending on how that goes? But it's like at the same time, even though the welfare give out might be different, we still have the economically prosperous part where it's like, it's not dependent on who makes the most money, it's dependent on like who is growing, kind of thing. So it's like, is your businesses growing? Are you staying stagnant, or are you declining? Because where I'm from, when our city went into bankruptcy, it just collapsed. Businesses were gone, and it's not economically prosperous. But then when you go to the next town over and they're thriving and being very economically prosperous, they're like building new buildings and more businesses are opening and everything's improving. So it's like, even though there's the difference between non-economically prosperous and economically prosperous. And even though the pricing might be different, there's still that scale of economically prosperous is like a straight line. It's not ups and downs like the price of living is.
Great. Oh, we got another question. Okay, Andrew.
So, I want to be as respectful as possible asking these probing questions, and if at any point you feel uncomfortable, please just don't answer. But I want to try and see if I can get you to see it from a different perspective.
Okay.
Just because the views are so extreme in one direction. And so I want to see if maybe I can get you to see it from a different light. So I'm going to ask you some personal questions, and if you don't want to answer them, that's okay.
Okay.
You said that on welfare you can make $30,000, and that you don't even make that much per year. I was wondering
Yeah.
how much do you make?
It depends, because I'm just in like a part-time job where I just pick up hours where I can. So it's like, I'm a college student, so it's like I just live off with what I can, though my parents pay for my education, so I'm not really a good person to like be in that balance.
So my point is like being someone, and you're not alone in this, that has the advantage of being in an affluent family and having the advantage of having education and living expenses, groceries, car payments, gas, all of that paid for. How can you justify being against welfare when in a sense, we kind of are. It's just our families instead of the government.
Okay, so for me, in my family, my dad was laid off for 3 years, and because of the choices that he made in terms of his like money beforehand, we just lived very frugal, and we never had to receive any government benefits, even though my dad didn't work steadily for a whole 3 years. And he also ended up working several jobs in order to make sure that we can be prosperous, like middle class. So for me, in terms of like welfare, personally, I feel that if you're on welfare, you also need to be working to either get a job or be working in a way that's going to benefit the common good. And so when I look at welfare and the people that I know who have received it, they're not working towards that. And so for me, in terms of welfare, I'm okay with welfare and being like, we are going to support families who are in need, because we don't want that, and that's not good for just the overall society. But we also have to think about, are these people just living off of our money, or are they living off of what we can give them for now and then working to be independent themselves? Because that's what I feel is most important, because I know people who've worked since they were 13 years old, and it's like, okay, well, if they were working at 13, why is this able-bodied person just staying at home, watching TV all day, and not working, when my friend who's 13 is out getting a job that he can? It might not be great, but it is what it is. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to be this prosperous person. There are low-income families, but at the same time, we need to not be stagnant in what we do with welfare. We need to like promote them to get out on their own into the workforce. And right now in California, we don't have any programs that promote that.
What about job training programs, like workplace, where they give you job training skills and resume building workshops and things like that that the state pays for?
That actually gets into another paper I think we're going to be doing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because they have, you can find like job placement agencies or temporary
Yeah.
job placement, and they have
That's
those.
not part of welfare though. That's,
Right, but it's a
Well,
job
it
placement
is.
program that gives them the skills for free, essentially.
yeah, but are they taking advantage of that? It's the problem. It's like, are we requiring them to do certain things? So like in the excerpt that I read, there were requirements that came along with it. Right now, there are no requirements for receiving welfare. It's, are you low income? Do you have such and such kids? How are you living? It's like, okay, you're low enough in income that will support you. It's not, okay, if we're gonna give you money, you need to do something in return. So even, I love the idea of like working for the government, and like, even if you can't work and you can't find a job, at least let's put you to work in something that's productive to our society, instead of just having them do nothing. So that's where I kind of feel like, yes, there are ways where it's like you can, but are they taking advantage of it? And I think that it needs to be a requirement. It's like, if you're on welfare, then you need to do this in response to that. And if they're not doing that in response, like they need to agree to that beforehand. And if they don't do that, then that's when you have to be like, okay, well, we can't support you if you're not abiding to your half of this.
So that's a states' rights issue. I don't know, I'll get into that, but some states do that, so.
Yeah,
It's just
like mine was
California.
specific on California,
Yeah.
so like California doesn't. So I definitely feel like we
Maine
need to
just
do
cut
that.
their food stamps by like 80% because they told everyone they had to volunteer to work. And people, I don't know if they left Maine or what they did, but.
There's also states that are now doing drug testing in order to be on welfare. That was something recent that several states are doing now.
So I think we're going to wrap that up, but good job presenting. Once again. So, who wants to go next? Okay, I think we have to fire